Listen to these words of Swamiji. The affirmation this morning is on energy. Energy is ours not when we hoard our strength, but when we devote it willingly, joyously, toward the attainment of that in which we deeply believe. Faith and energy go hand in hand. If you have deep faith in what you are doing, you can move mountains. Energy is always highest when one's cause is just. The greater one's faith, the greater his willpower. And the greater his willpower, the greater his flow of energy. And please affirm with me, within me lies the energy to accomplish all that I will to do. Behind my every act is God's infinite power. Within me lies the energy to accomplish all that I will to do. Behind my every act is God's infinite power. Now in a whisper, within me lies the energy to accomplish all that I will to do. Behind my every act is God's infinite power. And now silently, within me lies the energy to accomplish all that I will to do. Behind my every act is God's infinite power. Please pray silently with me. O cosmic energy, vitalize all the cells of my body, recharge my mind with boundless inspiration, and fill my soul with thy inexhaustible joy.
And good morning to everyone and those that are tuning in online. This reading is from Whispers from Eternity by Paramahansa Ananda, entitled, Make Me a Lion of Thy All-Conquering Wisdom. I, a lion cub of the Divine Mother, found myself thrown into life among the sheep of human frailties, of fear, failure, and disease. Living long among them, I learned to bleat with weakness, forgetting my lion nature and its roars, which could frighten away all petty, pestering sorrows. O lion of realization, thou didst drag me away from those bleating sheep to the mere smooth waters of meditation. There didst thou cry, gaze. But I held my eyes tightly shut, bleeding fear. Thy roar of wisdom then reverberated through my body. Thou madest me by hard shaking and spiritual urging open my eyes. And there, lo, in the crystal pool of my inner peace, I saw my features to be even as thine own. Now I know myself as a lion of cosmic power. I will bleat no more with fear, weakness, and suffering, for I roar now with vibrant, mighty power. I bound about through the forest of all experiences, seizing little creatures of vexing worries, timid fears, and wild hyenas of disbelief, devouring them ruthlessly. O lion of immortality, roar through me thine all-conquering power of wisdom. And this reading is from The Path, drawn from the chapter on Kriya Yoga. This is when Swamiji was building Ananda, and extraordinarily as it was, he would be in the city, San Francisco, 3.5 miles away from the village itself, a good sizable commute. And he would be giving classes in large cities. He was attracting sizable crowds every night of the week. And then he would come up to the village. He was the only one that was doing the satsangs and the teaching at that time, a whole weekend of activity. And then he would go back and do it again. And this went on and on and on. So that's what was going on in the building of Ananda as we go into this reading. I had an interesting experience a few years ago relative to this energy drain. Having, as I thought, seriously overextended myself in my activities, I had reached a point of utter exhaustion. One evening, I had a class to give. I was visiting my parents. My mother, seeing how really exhausted I was, urged me, "You mustn't punish yourself like this. Really, this one evening you simply have to cancel your class." I couldn't do that, however. I didn't know how to reach all those students and tell them not to come. Half an hour before leaving the house, I lay down on my bed to rest. I didn't sleep, however. Instead, I reviewed in my mind as dispassionately as possible all the reasons for feeling so very tired. The endless activities, daily lectures, classes, a weekly radio program, constant travel, an unceasing stream of correspondence, constant telephone calls, numerous requests for interviews, incessant demands for personal decisions from people who could have made just as good decisions on their own. As I recalled to my mind each of these drains on my energy, my first reaction was instinctively to reject it. Oh, no, it's just too much. And then in return came the dispassionate challenge. Is it? It's a fact of your life now, whether you like it or not. Why not simply accept it? In each case, accepting this advice, I felt as though I had closed some psychic door through which energy had been pouring out of me in my anxiety to push the unwanted experience out of my life. As each door closed, I found more energy welling up within me. The results were extraordinary. By the end of that half an hour, my fatigue had completely vanished, and I was fairly bursting with enthusiasm to give that class. My mother, seeing me now, exclaimed, "What a wonderful sleep you've had. You look completely refreshed." Interestingly enough, the subject of my class that evening was energization. So for whoever participated in Shivaratri last night and in whatever form, those all-nighters and so forth, again, we appreciate all of the blessings that you've poured out into this universe, because that is exactly what's needed. The more blessings that we can have, we all know, very, very important at this time. Well, when Swamiji was building Ananda, he was in his mid-40s, and he was just tapped in. There's just no other way to describe it. You couldn't put out that amount of energy over a sustained period of time without being in tune. And yet, for him, it wasn't always that way. When he came to master, he felt such joy in reading the autobiography of a yogi, the blessing of going to Los Angeles, meeting Yogananda, being accepted as a disciple, that he thought that that which was separating him from the infinite, as really all, as we all feel, really, and it's truly a reality. It's paper thin, if that, as it's just a dream. And so, with this joy that was welling up, he said that he couldn't wait to meditate, and he was meditating at that time about 6 hours a day with all of his activities there as a monastic at Mount Washington. And so one particular time he decided to go for, as we say, go for broke, put everything he had into it. And so he meditated around 40 hours or so, and that's a long time, continuously. And then had to admit that I guess there was still some more karma that needed to be offered into the light. And interestingly, he found that months after, it was very difficult then to go deep, because he had pushed with his own will. And though it was noble, nevertheless, and we've had these experiences in time when we have chapters in our life of intense activity that if we're not careful, there isn't that calm, reminding undercurrent of energy, then we can get ourselves off track and find that we truly have to recover. I had that experience. I've only burnt out one time in my life. And I was about 30 at the time, serving down in Sacramento. And so I decided to go for broke. I guess maybe I hadn't heard Swami's story. Maybe it was before he wrote The Path in the mid 60s. I don't know. But basically, not a period of 40 hours. I wasn't up for that. But I was building my meditation up over time. Perhaps it was weeks, perhaps it was months, way more than I should have. And I collapsed. And I went to Swamiji and I had told him, I guess during that period, that I was going for broke. And he gave me wise counsel, which I don't think I quite took to heart at the moment, but I learned from bitter experience later. He says, only saints go for broke. In other words, my friend, very good. You're putting out all this energy, but you're not a Himalayan yogi, as Yogananda said. There's lots of yogis up in the Himalayas. They're just spiritual bums. They perhaps have gone up to the Himalayas for noble reasons, but they could have done a little of introspection and seen that they weren't up for the task. They weren't Ram Gopal, who could meditate 18, 20, 22 hours a day. They needed really to look again at their life and understand that probably they needed a good old mix of meditation and seva and so forth, and move along as Master has counseled us with, proceed with slow speed. There's a wonderful chapter in this new path, Work versus Meditation. I read it many times, and this was one of the nuns who was there to help Master. Master was cooking. He was a fabulous cook, and he had the added blessing of being able to taste food of the spiritual eye. And even when he felt to taste food, he could taste hot, boiling, perhaps dal, and without any ill effect. And so he was there cooking. And so she thought, well, I'm here and I can help perhaps clean up a little bit. And then she noticed that it was the messiest, she said, the messiest cooking she's ever seen in her entire life. He would, use one saucepan, put it to the side, use another, and she was just overwhelmed. And she was trying to keep up with him, which was impossible. Of course, he did say at one point during his campaigns, when he was filling the largest halls in the lands, others were trying to keep up with him. He said, don't, you'll burn up. He was working 19 hours a day. He was completely tapped in. There was no way. And so at one point, this nun, seeing that something was happening, basically for her, this was out of control cooking. So she just decided to sit down and wait, and she would clean up after he had finished cooking. And then she noticed that he wasn't quite making the mess. As a matter of fact, he was cooking normally now. And she understood that what she was doing was just busy work. That was all. And that's why Master said, and it's a pretty frank counsel, whoever got it, and of course for all of us, if you think you're working too hard, you're no good. And, well, gee, that's a hard teaching. Here we're trying to understand the spirit of service and all of these things. And yet, if it's ego driven, then we find ourselves getting bogged down. But if it's spirit driven, then that's, of course, an entirely different story. Rome and I had the blessing, as many others did, to care for a dear friend of ours, Rich Bazan. He's passed on now. And he had ALS, which, basically your body is just disintegrating on you. And he was a very, very robust man. And I remember he was working on one of the projects. It's called Serenity House. It's one of our facilities for guests there at the Expanding Light. And I saw his arm in a sling. And I thought, that picture doesn't go along with Rich. Rich was, foreman of the job, very strong, very skilled carpenter. He must have hurt himself. It was the beginning of his deterioration that went on for about 4 years. And I remember after he passed, he had 4 kids, a wonderful family. I had a dream, and he had passed now, and yet there he was in his vibrant, healthy self. And so I said, Rich, of course, I was so overjoyed to see him. Have you seen Master? That's all I cared about. He's now on the other side, and I wanted to know, has he seen Master? And he said, yes. And that was the end of the dream. I was totally satisfied that a man that had put out that kind of energy, because when we would feed him and so on, and it was extremely challenging for him just to eat until he was needed to be fed intravenously. Then he would bite the spoon because it was too much now, that particular serving, for him to be able to process. I mean, it was really extreme. And again, his wife, family, friends, everyone was overawed as we were by his spirit. There was a time when he even, hard to imagine, in his deteriorated state, Swami was leading close to 200 people down to Los Angeles to go to the shrines and so forth. And of course, he wasn't going to miss. And so at one point, we went to an Indian restaurant, and there we were sitting with Rich, and Swami was making the rounds of the various tables. And he said to Rich, with real heart, he said, it's so inspiring, what you're doing and who you are and so on. It was very touching. And Rich, he could still talk a little bit. He said, Swami, the courage and so forth you're speaking of is nothing compared to driving with Haridas in Los Angeles. And he shared that because we were in a caravan and we didn't know where the restaurant was. And so I was almost bumper to bumper. We were the second car after Swami. I was going through red lights and all, and I'm a good driver. I don't drive like that unless, of course, we're going to the movies. That's a little different. But that was Rich, right up toward the very, very end. He had retained, of course, he had a wonderful sense of humor. He wasn't thinking about himself, and that, of course, is the key. There are no obstacles, only opportunities, and that is this path. And so we find that when we have these issues, and so many of them are internal, it's always just a matter of pausing. What's trying to happen here, as we like to say at Ananda, and then find there always is a solution. You'll never find a problem as big as some of the problems are, because we are here, in debtor's prison, as I like to call it, working out our karma, that, there's going to be challenges that are just colossal. We just have to keep on holding on to the light. That's why I like the image of the light at the end of the tunnel. The only thing that I found a little rough to digest initially is that I would use this image and I would rejoice, and then there was another tunnel. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I mean, who's directing traffic around here? And then, okay, the second tunnel, fine, I understand. Then there was a third tunnel, and it just kept on going. And I'm tunneling still, as we all are. But the light is at the end of the tunnel. And that is the focus of the yogi and yogini, and that's what it's all about. And that's why it's such a joy to be linking arms together as we do in continuing to stay encouraged and to, keep the faith. And so Swami, in this extreme situation, and it was extreme, this writing was not exaggerated at all. He, though a man of dynamic energy, a Renaissance man, it had to be that type to spearhead the drive to found again for Master the first community and so forth, that he was exhausted. Quite something. But how did he get out of it? And his mother, because his mother, wonderful lady, saintly, really, she thought he'd had a good sleep. He wasn't sleeping. He had just enough of a spark at that point of complete and utter exhaustion to think, something. There's got to be a way. There's got to be a door that I can find that will get me out of this situation. And the reading goes on that he, after the energization class, which he said was the best he had ever given, he came home. He was till 2 a.m, typing and doing all the various things that were needed. Where was the exhaustion? He had thrown it out. And so for us, it really is the greater the will, the greater the flow of energy, the greater the flow of energy, the greater the magnetism. That's why it's such a joy that in the very beginning, level 1, we're giving them these wonderful gifts of meditation, which is to say, calm reminding activity, and energization, because it takes a lot of energy. And that, for people that are receptive, and of course many are, then they say, okay, I've got to see now about this transition. As one of my friends said, we're just trying to reclaim 6 inches of real estate from the ego to the point between the eyebrows. That's it. What's the problem? What is the problem? And as we are able, for those that have Kriya and so forth, to appreciate all we're trying to do, and it's why I guess it's part of being a Californian, although we're pretty much Indians now, but still, the gold mining chapter some hundreds of years ago in California was really quite something. People with gold fever and all of that stuff. And what were they doing? They were, years for some of them, prospecting, not knowing if they were going to strike it rich. And I thought to myself, those guys, they were tough to do what they did at that time. It was very, very crude situations. They didn't go home to their house with AC and a nice meal. They were really putting out. For us, we have our gold mine, and we have the tools to get to that goal, which of course is joy. And so more and more, I think that we really are all just prospecting, but it's not that difficult of a job compared to what those guys, and of course, many in this world that are seeking some meaning in their life, we know that there's a log jam. And we know that as we, bit by bit, persevering day by day, that joy is there. And of course, all of us in some way or another, or we wouldn't have been attracted to the spiritual path. Divine Mother does dangle some goodies before us as we get on the spiritual path, and all of us could share our stories, and they would be very inspiring. And then usually the hard work begins, but along the way, that joy increases. And of course, we are able to experience that joy and share that joy. And that's, again, the blessing of satsang. So again, thank you, stout souls that came, and all of you that are there on the internet, perhaps recovering from the all-nighters. Again, it's a joy to be with you all.